What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to be doing a Guilty Gear Strive tier list on the most recent Baiken patch. I believe it's version 1.13. First and foremost, the most important thing you have to do on a new tier list is define the upper and lower bounds. In this case, we're going to be talking about character strength. So when it comes to the upper bounds of the game, I think there are a couple of characters that are above the rest, but they're not by too much, but they definitely have a solid edge. I think that calls for like an S plus to S kind of variation. And when it comes to the lower bound, I don't think anybody's unplayable. Probably lowest I would see in this game is like B, and then probably like A minus, A plus. I think this is probably a good representation of where the current cast is. So the first character I want to talk about, of course, is going to be Goldlewis, the character that I have the most experience with. Some would call me a one trick with him. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree. But where do I think Goldlewis is in the grand scope of things?
1 hour later.
If I had $1 for every time somebody told me, Goldlewis is top tier, he won Kumite, how could he have done it if he's not the best in the game? I'm on a bit of a tangent, but I would say Goldlewis is probably like A minus, definitely not B. Goldlewis has a really hard time getting started, but once he's started, he has options to both overextend a pressure, even if it means that he really has to overcommit and he's kind of punishable for doing it. Or he can just go for his basic things, and it really is difficult to defend against Goldlewis, both mid-screen and in the corner, if the Goldlewis knows how to use their options appropriately, depending on their defensive options. One thing that prevents Goldlewis from being able to, really compete for those upper tiers is his matchup spread. It's definitely really difficult for him to get in on some characters, and getting in is the name of the game when it comes to Goldlewis. But this is kind of just the way he's been designed, right? It's more of an archetype. It's hard for him to get in, but once he gets in, it feels really good. And he's designed so that way he has a hard time to get in, because if he didn't, he would just be, up here. He'd be a godlike character, which I understand. Goldlewis is definitely a frustrating character to play against if you don't know how exactly to play against him. But for now, I can confidently say Goldlewis, he's not really up there, but he's in a really solid place, and I don't think he really needs any changes. From here, I think we can just go in order from the way these people are placed, and that means Soul's coming up first. And what I have to say about Soul is that he is no longer up here the way that he was once was. I just don't think he's as degenerate as the other characters that are there, but it's not by much. It's not like it's not like Soul is lacking. It's more that Soul is outclassed by characters that don't have to really interact with the game. Ironically, Soul is a more honest character than a lot of people give him credit for. I mean, he does kind of have to play neutral. He's got to play footsies. He does have great tools to play that, but he's still playing the game, He doesn't have what I like to call a special move neutral. Unless he has meter, I guess. Yeah, but Soul is defined by his insane damage, really strong pressure, insane neutral if the person using the character knows how to use those tools correctly. And I can say I've played some very good Souls, and they're very scary to play against. This character is really good. Next up, we have Kai, and this is a character that I probably would have put at bottom 5 at the beginning of the game, but now I think he's very solid, especially since I've seen the come up of Flash Metroid, who recently picked up Kai, and they've been doing very well, on top of obviously Kizzy and Stank Boys, who I'm always impressed of. These players make this character look very strong. This dude's neutral. His buttons are so incredibly good. It's actually so frustrating for me as a Goldlewis player to get in on this dude, because whenever I get close, it's a 6P. Whenever I'm slightly outspaced, it's a /. Whenever he's approaching me, it's like a 2S. He really does have the options, every option required for neutral. On top of that, having a really solid fireball. But when compared to Soul, Soul is just the more complete package, and I think that is what justifies the distinction between Soul and S and Kai and A+. Next up is Mei, and I'm really surprised at the lack of representation in competitive games for Mei, because Mei is someone that we saw a lot early into the game, and her stock has kind of gone down. My go-to Mei player was Tempest, but more recently he's been dual maining Mei and Leo, and I've honestly been seeing a lot more Leo from them. So I think Mei is a character that I don't really have trouble dealing with. The Goldlewis Mei matchup is not too bad, but Mei in general has really strong strengths when it comes to her neutral. I mean, she has S-class disjoints when it comes to her neutral. Her pressure is also very strong, and if you're playing against a good Mei, it's going to be a lot more different than like your average old May. You're not just going to see the straight up general, S or H dolphin into strike throw. You're going to see them like fluctuate between 15 different options, and they're going to make it very, very difficult for you to know what's coming up. When it comes to May's game plan, I don't believe she has such a hard time getting started, and she doesn't have a hard time enforcing either, because she makes a lot of horizontal space in her block strings, and that pushes the opponent closer and closer to the corner. And when May gets you in the corner, she's pretty much a mini Goldlewis without any of the drawbacks of neutral. So I think May is just a really solid character. I'm probably going to put her in S, definitely behind Soul. By the way, I'm going to try to order this as best I can, but I think she's worse than Soul, but definitely in that upper echelon of characters. Next up, we've got Axel. Axel being another character that everyone thought was really, really good early into the game. And slowly people have picked at Axel and getting better and better at these matchups. And, matchups that people thought once were impossible, like Goldlewis versus Axel, for example, are now actually pretty doable if the Goldlewis knows what they're doing. And that just goes for everybody. If you're a competitive player, you probably have a decent understanding on how to play around Axel's zoning. And there actually is quite a bit of counterplay. And because of that, the one thing you don't want to give a zoner is counterplay, okay? That being said, I think Axel's like at the bottom of A+, borderline A- down here with Goldlewis. You know what? I'm going to make a statement. I think Axel is down here with Goldlewis. Axel, obviously having really, really good buttons, really great zoning. But the problem is that if you're a character that doesn't have a hard time getting in on Axel, you're not going to have a hard time finishing him off. And that leads to a lot of polarizing matchups where, okay, if you're the character that gets in, great, you beat him. If you're the character that doesn't, okay, you're having a much harder time, but you still have the chance to get in, and all it takes is one mistake. Next up, we have Chipp, and Chipp is easily my most hated character in the game, but that doesn't mean that they're, top one or whatever. Mostly it's because I'm just not a fan of the really speedy but dies quickly archetype, the one that dominates a neutral and dominates you in pressure, but hey, you guessed right with a mash. I don't really like the gameplay that it enforces, but regardless, I think Chipp is around the same level as Kai. If I had to put them in order, I would say Chipp is probably slightly better than Kai. Let me do this. There we go. At the beginning of the game, people had a really hard time with Chipp because, hey, you did button into cross up or button into command grab or button into button or button into run a throw, and that was enough for people. The Chipp game has evolved so much since then. Chipp is now the character that will camp you out from full screen and whiff punish your 5p. This leads to very frustrating gameplay where this guy is just constantly in control. And A, if he ever makes a mistake, he either A, dies because you got a really, really nice hit with some really good Oki afterwards, or B, you get a regular knockdown and then you get DP'd. Regardless though, I think it's clear that Chipp is designed to dictate the pace of the game. He can choose whether he wants to camp you out, he can choose whether he wants to play super aggressive, and his stagger game is phenomenal, and his mix-up game is phenomenal, and his defense is really, really strong. He's got a 3-framer, he's got a DP, he's got a great 5k, 2k. So what keeps them from being that top tier? And that it's quite simple. It's, his HP. We're all human, we're gonna make mistakes, and a character with that little HP cannot afford to make a lot of them. Next up, we've got Potemkin, and I think my thoughts Potemkin have gone down over time. I used to think Potemkin was one of these really, really strong characters. Now I think he's probably like lower A+, definitely still better than our Goldlewis and Axel tier currently. But Potemkin suffers from some of the same issues that Goldlewis does, but he has some slightly better tools in neutral, including his slide head and his mega fist and his hammerfall. Potemkin makes really good use of meter in neutral. And if he ever gets a gold burst, you're going to have to hold the hammerfall and the PRC into whatever he does. Potemkin obviously has some of the best mix-ups in the game, just unreactable 50-50s and mind games on top of those 50-50s. So why isn't Potemkin that great? It's because obviously he's a big body. He suffers from a lot of the same weaknesses as Goldlewis, as I said before. And it's a good thing too, because once again, like I said with Goldlewis earlier, these are the kinds of characters that if you give too much, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. If you make these characters really, really good, no one wants to play this game anymore, I think Potemkin was actually like top 1 in the beta, and people despised it. They were so upset. And I think Potemkin's in a pretty good spot right now. Next up, we have Faust, and we finally have somebody to put at the bottom of the tier list. Faust is missing something, and I don't know what it is because he's received buff after buff after buff after buff, and somehow he still hasn't moved from bottom 2. Faust is some of the greatest buttons in the game, including his 6P, his far slash, his 2H, his J2K, but at the same time, he has, some of the worst health in the game, some of the worst pressure in the game. Really good Oki, but it's kind of difficult to get to that position to begin with. His damage is decent in the corner. Mid-screen, he's playing more of a pokey kind of play style. If you give him too much space, he will get items down, but the items don't necessarily benefit his game plan a lot of the time. Obviously, there are good memes about his trumpet. If there's one thing I think Faust needs, it's probably just like a better item pool. Maybe give him 1 or 2 items that are a bit stronger, things that like definitively help him or pursue his game plan. I really like what they did with the Afro change recently, giving him like a kind of neutral tool if he picks it up where he can like throw it down and then follow it up. That's really cool. Give him something else like that. Until then, he'll be chilling at the bottom of the tier list. Next up, we have Millia, another really speedy character, but, Chipp's mix-up is more about, touching the opponent and then you can mix. Millia's is getting a knockdown, which is a lot harder of a win condition, but obviously she gets much more reward for getting that knockdown, having like these infinite looping setups where she can go for all these options to mix you up and kind of kill you if you have no options to stop her. The problem isn't her game plan. Her game plan is great, and it's difficult to get like that initial knockdown, but it's worth it for her. The problem with Millia is the risk reward is almost never skewed into her favor. Even though having the knockdown into a great mix-up, that sounds really great, but considering that Millia has to overcommit to get into these scenarios, Millia dies in like 1 or 2 hits, it puts her at the bottom half of this tier list for sure. And now we have my first based pick of this tier list, and that is Zato in S+. Zato has, I'm just going to describe Zato for you. Zato has incredible buttons. Zato has incredible special moves that you can just use to win you neutral. Zato has incredible pressure and mix-up options with great reward. Zato has some of the greatest conversions off any hit in the entire game if you're ready for it. Zato's conversions not only do a ton of damage, but they work like anywhere on the screen and have incredible corner carry into either a wall break or more incredible mix-up. And what's the drawback for all of these great qualities in a character? No reversal option and low HP. I'm a little biased here because more recently I've been watching a ton of Latif, and Latif makes Zato look like the greatest character in the game. That being said, I'm an impressionable person. I watch Latif and I'm like, that's the character playing, not Latif, okay? Obviously that's not the case, but Latif recently has shown me the potential of Zato, and I think that potential is among the best in the game. Next up, we have Ramlethal. This is another top character in the game, but I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that. This character is not so great mid-screen, but off of a hit, they can convert you into the corner, and if they catch you lacking, they can throw a sword and push you in the corner. And the reason I bring up the corner is because that is where this character is unstoppable. Ramlethal is a better Goldlewis in the corner, which is quite ridiculous because Goldlewis really shines in the corner, and to shine in the corner, he has to struggle a lot more mid-screen, and Ramlethal doesn't have those drawbacks. Ramlethal gets to play the character with amazing buttons, amazing neutral, and then also gets the greatest corner pressure in the game probably. If you guys haven't felt the corner pressure for yourself, it is suffocating, is the way I would put it. If there was one change I'd make with Ramlethal, it's just a little more interactivity in the corner. Goldlewis is, as a Goldlewis player, I can sympathize with Ramlethal because we also have suffocating pressure in the corner, but Goldlewis has a lot of gaps and there's a lot of counterplay to what he does. And when it comes to Ramlethal, it feels like the counterplay is limited. I think if you give us a little more FD pushback on her or something, we can definitely make it happen. It won't be as bad. Hey, and if they don't change her, that's completely fine too. I think she's actually not as broken as other people say. I think she's completely fine in the context of the game. Next up, we have Leo, a character that has gotten much better with time. And there's a reason that every single tournament you watch, there's going to be a Leo in top 8, or dare I say a Leo in grand finals every single time. This character is represented by some of the best in the world, including Tempest, Razzo, and K7. All phenomenal players that are going to show this character has everything. This character has a massive HP pool, a great DP, big buttons, a great 6P, great mix-up, and great conversions. This character really isn't lacking in much, besides the fact that he is kind of forced to play grounded, which can be somewhat awkward for him in neutral sometimes. I know as a Goldlewis player, the neutral isn't too bad for me because Goldlewis does well against more grounded opponents. But yeah, there's not much to say about Leo besides he is a phenomenal character. At one point in time, I thought Sol was just way better than Leo, and now I think it is probably the other way around. And now we have Nago. Nago is definitely up here for me. I just realized that I haven't necessarily been ordering these people. Let me actually clarify. Actually, this is actually really important because I think this is top 4 in the game. So this could be a really, really fun time to show off what I currently think about the game. So when it comes to character potential, I think it is clear that I already ordered it, baby. Zato top 1, Nago second, Ramlethal third, Leo fourth. I think this is pretty fair. Now let's talk about Nago. Nago is not lacking in anything. Nago, I honestly think needs a little bit of adjustments. Although if they don't do that, that's fine too. He has some of the best buttons in the game for both Abare and neutral. He has the greatest specials in the game and can use them in neutral to win games for him. They unnecessarily have buffed him every single patch. I don't think he's needed that, but it's only made him better. That far / change really put him on the map for a lot of people. And I think the clone buff was borderline unnecessary. There's not much to say about Nago that already hasn't been said. This character, once again, as you know, the rest of these characters all have really insane conversion rates with really high damage. Nago obviously has the biggest character health pool in the game. Once again, defense incredible with some of the best challenging buttons in the game. His mix-up isn't necessarily great, but every single time you mess up, he's going to get such big reward that it doesn't matter. His Oki is probably the best in the game, and if he ever hits you with a command grab, the game's over. And I think that's honestly enough. I don't think it can be understated how overwhelmingly advantaged Nago is after hitting a command grab because he has all that blood to work with and can now do like button into clone into strike throw. I did mention earlier that I think some of what Nago has should be changed, and I think all that really needs to be changed is his blood rage state. I don't think it's fair that this state that's supposed to be a huge drawback actually favors him a lot, and you see a lot of people taking advantage of this with like purposely popping blood in the corner into getting like high-low mix-up for the game. You die, right? And even if Nago messes up and he survives that blood rage state, he is heavily advantaged from there, having 0 blood to just spam neutrals. I'm not saying spam in like the negative way. I mean spam as in like he can use them over and over and over again in any order. And yeah, if you didn't kill Nago after blood, you're probably losing that round because of all the options that he has for him after that. Oh, final thing is that time freeze is actually dumb. You have no way to enforce your advantage after the blood rage, which means that he gets a guaranteed clone into guaranteed pressure. Next up, we have Giovanna. Giovanna being a offense stagger based character. I don't think that she does that as well as Sol. And I think that she was heavily hurt by the FD changes. You know what? I'm actually going to make a slight adjustment. I think Gio is actually worse than Mei because after the FD adjustments, her pressure got a lot more reactable, including her tick throws. Obviously, there are still mind games every time she runs up on you. Doesn't necessarily have to go for the grab, but it definitely hurts her that she's pushed back a lot more after her normals, especially when you FD something like her 2S. Whereas Mei obviously didn't get affected by the FD changes because that's not the kind of pressure that she uses. More than pressure though, I think Gio is more defined by her amazing neutral with her like 236K, her 6P, her 5K, and most importantly her 2D, which covers the ground and anti-airs. This character is really solid, and I think at one point they might have been top 5. Currently, I don't think that's the case, but I do think they have a solid position in top 10. Next up, we have Anji, who's in a very similar situation to Faust, where they've always been bottom 2. They've been bottom 2 bros for the entirety of the game, despite both having received patch after patch with buffs. It's funny that Anji is defined by his offense, but his offense just has really big gaps in that, they can literal gaps. I mean, like they can be DP'd, they can be reversaled. There's a reasonable risk reward where if like you're not going to die to his hit, then you should probably mash because getting out of that pressure is much more valuable than taking that extra bit of damage. His neutral is good, but it loses to just defensive play. Like if you're just dash blocking, you can obviously punish a spin, and you can, despite Ko being like the greatest anti-air in the entire game, if you're not in the air, you can easily air throw it afterwards. But yeah, I think Anji is defined by one word, and that's exploitable. Exploitable on offense, exploitable on defense, exploitable in neutral. And by the way, when I say exploitable on defense, I mean like you wait out his counter or you wait out his spin. All that being said, exploitable is not the adjective you want describing your character. Anji is bottom one. And next up, we have Ino, who is probably most similar to Millia in that both of their games rely on getting a knockdown and then Oki mixing up your character. The thing about Millia is that it's not her game plan holding her back. It's more of her ability to reset pressure. Like Millia can do her mix-up, but if you block that mix-up, she doesn't have very many options to open you up afterwards. Whereas Ino, it's all about the mind game. And having that mind game puts her way up there. I think she's better than Giovanna. I don't think that Ino is quite top 5 material. No, I think this is it. I think this is probably going to be my top 7 going into the rest of this tier list. I think Ino is incredibly strong. Definitely having the best Oki and the best stagger pressure, despite it's weirdly formatted, but she can stagger with like going overhead and then choosing to go low afterwards, which you would generally do to like jail low afterwards. Or you could obviously go into another overhead and then another one, or another overhead and then a low. And although there are a lot of gaps, you have to press the right button for the right situation, because pressing a 6P might get you whiff punished. Pressing 5P she might low profile it with or 2K afterwards. It's very difficult dealing with Ino. And although she suffers from a lot of the same weaknesses as Millia with like the lower HP and relying on Oki to do stuff, she just does it better. Next up we have Jacko, and I'm gonna give you a very base take. I think most people would probably put Jacko like here-ish, slightly better than Goldlewis, but definitely in this A- area. I think that Jacko is bottom 3 and most comparable to Anji and Faust in that she has heavy weaknesses. And I think most importantly, the risk reward is just like not in her favor a lot of the time when it comes to taking battles. Jacko has no defensive options. Yes, she does have a reversal super, but it loses to just like a jump into a button. You don't even need to immediate. If they don't challenge it, I mean, it's as good as your turn right there and you're calling out that super option. I think I like looking at the Jacko Goldlewis comparison because I think both of them have pretty difficult game plans to get started. Jacko needs to get like a knockdown into a minion. Goldlewis needs to get a knockdown, but obviously is much worse neutral. But if you compare the actual strength of each of these game plans, Goldlewis will just build risk on top of mixing up opponents naturally. And Jacko mostly focuses on like gapless risk building and then hoping you get hit by like a 5D. It's not the strongest of game plans, but obviously we have seen it work at like a top level with like people like Adventure and Not Pichu showing some good results and being obviously very great players. But I think although Jacko has like a big skill ceiling, the way that we're seeing Jacko being played right now fits into like one play style of just doing random neutral stuff, getting a minion out, finally getting a knockdown, and then doing minion pressure in the corner. And it's just not as strong as other characters' game plan. I mean, I don't think there's another way to put it. The character's really cool, and I do think that she could get better in the future if we find some kind of tech, but I think more than likely we're going to see Jacko down here until we get a buff. Next up, we have Happy Chaos, and I do have to say that I'm probably a little biased because Happy Chaos Goldlewis might be the worst matchup in the game. That matchup is pure pain. It's just a constant barrage of stay away from me, stay away from me, stay away from me. And all right, let me back it up a little bit. When Happy Chaos first came out, I thought this character is going to be so cool. It's going to be like a hybrid game plan where you're constantly moving in and out of spaces and you are zoning sometimes, but then also running forward and taking a turn. And although Happy Chaos has all this potential, it turns out that the most optimal way to play him is just to optimally zone people, which is not the most fun thing to watch or play against. Despite it not being liked, it's also just not that great of a game plan. And the character is really squishy. And if you just kind of sit there and block for long periods of time and kind of wait it out, and then dash when you can. Yeah, you're going to take a trillion in chip damage, but eventually you're going to get close to him, and all it's going to take is winning one button war where you press something, they press something. If you get a knockdown, you're going to be in a pretty good position probably to take that game. So all that being said, where would I put Happy Chaos? I think Happy Chaos comfortably sits in like this A+ tier. I don't think they're as good as Chipp, but I don't think that they actually struggle in many matchups. More than anything, their weaknesses come in their how intense they are to play. Like they're a very mechanically, technical kind of character where you constantly have to be doing this like negative edge and a button to do the zoning thing correctly. And once again, if you make a mistake, you could probably lose on the spot. I do, notably, I've watched a lot of Lost Soul, and even they, like being one of the best Happy Chaoses, make a lot of mistakes, and it leads to death a lot of the time. They get heavily punished by these players. And Happy Chaos, I think, just has like a kind of convoluted, hard to execute game plan. But if you want a zoner like this, he's the only one that does it. And I think it fits the meta pretty well. And finally, we have Baiken, the brand new character that came with the patch. I really thought this character had top tier potential, but man, was I wrong. I really think this character is lacking because of the risk reward skew. Baiken has a ton of options to not only extend pressure with staggers, but also punish the opponent for thinking that they can take a turn. But despite this, her lack of HP really hurts her, because if you want to play that brawly kind of game plan where you are like up in the opponent's face and you're constantly making them guess for their life, but you're also like accepting the risk of that, having low HP is not what you really want for that kind of character. I think Baiken is fairly similar to Soul in that sense, but Soul has much less of a risk, and obviously it has more offensive options as well. Baiken's reward just also isn't that great mid-screen. In the corner, she does get some good stuff. And what does she get in return for being like this kind of worse version than Soul? This is kind of a weird comparison I'm making, by the way, but I'm going to stick with it. Her compensation for having like the less damage mid-screen, having the worse overall pressure, having the less HP is, also not having like a DP. Instead, she has the parry, which is a lot harder to use than I thought it would be. It's actually very easy to bait out. But her compensation for all of this drawback is Yosansen. It's Yosansen. Having the ability to instant overhead mix is pretty much all she has over other characters. Assuming you also count like parry for DP, like that kind of 1-for-1 trade, which I think parry is just worse than DP. Obviously you get the ability to OS, but it's just more situational and involves more technical skill. But Yosansen is really the only thing that she has over those other kind of stagger characters. And honestly, Geo does it better with 5D. No, I'm kidding. But Yosansen is super strong. It's just that it's not enough to compensate for the rest of the downfalls. All that being said, I think Baiken probably belongs in A- between Goldlewis and Millia, largely due to that skew and risk reward, another problem that Millia has right next to her. And this is not to say that Baiken is a bad character. Baiken is a largely read-based character. If you make those reads, this is going to feel like the best character in the game. It's just that with every read you have the implication of some kind of risk, and having that implication of risk on a character with a little bit of HP, it's not so great. This character does get melted despite that high guts. And so far, I haven't had a problem with her, despite just not knowing the matchup very well. I can just kind of do my own thing and melt her. And that's all I've got. Drop a comment down below on what you agreed with, what you disagreed with. If you liked the video, make sure to like and subscribe, and consider joining the community Discord in the description, as well as checking me out on Twitch and following the Twitter. That's all I've got. Until next time, bye-bye.